This week we're going to be talking about sex-linked traits, and you guys had a little bit of background on the females being XX and males being XY when you did the Edmodo number 9, and that was one of the Punnett squares you had to do. So today we're going to talk a little bit more about the sex chromosomes, the X and the Y, and figure out why some traits, like colorblindness, are related, are sex-linked traits, meaning that they are found on the sex chromosomes. So here we go. So the sex chromosomes, the X and the Y, are your 23rd pair. All of the rest of them are just a number. You have chromosome 1, chromosome 2, chromosome 3, all the way to chromosome 22. But the 23rd pair is called the sex chromosomes, and it is the XY pair if you're a boy or the XX pair if you're a girl. So your sex chromosomes carry genes that determine whether you're a male or female. That's where the XX and the XY comes from. And they also carry genes that determine other traits. For example, first off, again, they're called the sex chromosomes because they determine the sex of the new baby. So mom, the eggs from mom always carry the X chromosome. Half of the male sperm carry the X and half carry Y. So remember when I told you guys about meiosis, how we have that division. Then we have one cell and it divides, and we get 2 cells each with 46, and then those 2 cells divide again and we get half the genetic information, 23 chromosomes in each of the 4 daughter cells. Okay, that's in meiosis, and that's where this comes from. So half of those the sperm cells are going to carry an X and half are going to carry a Y. If an egg fertilizes with a sperm cell carrying an X, it's going to be a girl. So you'll have an X from mom, an X from dad. That's what makes a girl a girl. If an egg fertilizes with a sperm cell carrying a Y, it will be a boy. X from mom, Y from dad. That's what makes a boy a boy. So if you want to know whether mom or dad determines whether you come out a boy or girl, it is the father. The father, the sperm cell, determines the gender of the baby. If the sperm cell is an X, it's a girl. If the sperm cell is a Y, it's going to be a boy. So when you guys were talking about your article in Language Arts about genetically modifying and picking certain traits, this is the first way. This is how people can say, oh, I want a boy or I want a girl, because then they just have to test and see the genetics of the particular sperm and make sure that if you want a boy, that it's a Y, and if you want a girl, that it's an X. Okay, so when we talk about sex-linked genes or sex-linked traits, we call them that because the alleles, remember alleles are your different forms of a gene, are passed from parent to child on the sex chromosome, the X chromosome or the Y chromosomes. And then traits controlled by sex-linked genes are called sex-linked traits. So sex-linked traits, what are they and why and when do they happen? So this is why. The X chromosome from mom is bigger than the Y chromosome from dad, okay? If you look here, here's the X, okay? And the Y is here, 1, 2. So that means this entire leg over here of the X is not paired up, okay? The X and the Y chromosome also carry different genes. So remember that your chromosomes pair up. Your X is going to pair up with the Y. Okay? So if there is no dominant gene, so there's all these genes on this leg of this X chromosome right here. If there's no dominant gene there, the recessive has to show up. So sometimes there's only one form of an allele if it is a sex-linked trait. Whatever that allele is, if it's dominant, it will show up dominant, but if it shows up recessive, it's going to be recessive. Okay? For example, color blindness is a recessive trait. It's also a sex-linked trait. It's carried on the X chromosome, which comes from your mom, but it affects boys more often. Girls have 2 X chromosomes, so they have matches. Boys have an X and a Y, so they don't have matches. Okay? Remember, mom is your X, dad is your Y. When the X and the Y pair up, it looks like this. And remember, over here, these genes do not have a match. Okay, one sex-linked trait is color blindness, red-green color blindness. A person with this trait cannot distinguish between red and green. They look like the same color. Remember, females have 2 X's, males have 1 X, 1 Y. And the X and the Y chromosomes have different genes, whereas chromosome 1, chromosome 2, chromosome 3, they all pair up. They have the same genes, but your X and your Y do not. Most of the genes on the X chromosome are not on the Y chromosome, and remember, your X chromosome is also bigger. Therefore, an allele on the X chromosome may have no corresponding allele on the Y chromosome, so whatever's there is what is going to show up. Because males only have 1 X chromosome, males are more likely than females to have a sex-linked trait that's controlled by a recessive allele. Because remember, if there's no match, then whatever there is going to show up. Okay? This is what color blindness looks like. I know some of you were asking about it in class. So your normal vision is on the left, and your red-green color blindness is on the right. Everything kind of looks brownish. You don't see green, you don't see red. They look like the same color. It's hard for them to distinguish. So when you go into, if you decide to go like into the military or something, they're going to check you for color blindness, and they'll give you a test that is going to look like, and I'll show it to you in just a second. But color blindness is a trait that's controlled by the recessive allele on the X chromosome. More males have it. However, the mother is the carrier because you get the X chromosome from mom. So, because boys are X and a Y, that recessive trait, if it's there, it will show up on boys because the Y does not have a matching dominant regular vision to block out the color blindness. A carrier is a person who has 1 recessive allele for a trait and 1 dominant. Okay, it means that. Remember, I talked about being a carrier for hazel eyes because my son has hazel eyes. Even though I have brown eyes, which are dominant, I'm still a carrier for that recessive trait. All right, color blindness. Let's see what we can see. Okay, so right here, these are the tests that they give to determine if you're colorblind. Okay, so if you're red-green colorblind on that top row where you see the these green dots with the red number 29 here, if you were colorblind, you would not be able to see that. You wouldn't be able to see this one. You wouldn't be able to see this 6 or this 56 or this 8. You would still be able to see this one, okay? But you would not be able to see the other ones. They would all look like the same colored dots, just like that barn did in the other picture, okay? Normal vision, the top would have been 25, 29, 45, bottom 56, 6, and 8. But if you're colorblind, you would, like I said, you would have been able to see that 25, but then you would have just seen spots and spots. And on the bottom, you would have been able to see the 56, but just spots on the other 2 because they were red and green. Okay, selective breeding, what you guys are all so excited about. I know you've been talking about it a lot in language arts. So that is Objective 54. I can describe selective breeding. And what selective breeding is, selecting desirable traits and using the organisms with those desirable traits to produce offspring with the same traits. Okay, so again, think about the article you read in language arts about choosing gender, choosing freckles or blonde hair. That's an example of selective breeding. So, for example, if you wanted to have a child with, if you had blonde hair and blue eyes and you wanted to have a child with blonde hair and blue eyes, you should probably marry someone with blonde hair and blue eyes. That would be selective breeding if you wanted your child to come out that way. Okay, but there are actual very useful things that we use selective breeding for. Here's some examples. So, how man has changed the traits of some organisms through selective breeding. So, we breed some cows to produce more milk. We breed horses for speed. I don't know if this is something you guys know, but in horse racing, if you have a horse that wins one of the big 3 races, like the Kentucky Derby or whatever, people pay, hundreds of thousands of dollars to have the winning horse mate with their horse so that they can get the genetics of that racehorse into a foal. Okay? Gold-colored fish, dogs that have been bred to be friendly, dogs that have been bred to be low allergy, or dogs that have been bred to be small. All different kinds of dogs, guys. They all came from coyotes at one point. Cats that are small and not aggressive. And I don't know about that cat that can play the piano. I don't know if that's true or not. Okay, so if you want to breed the prettiest guppies, how would you do it? Wild guppies look like those on the left, and look at the one on the right. That is a guppy that has been selectively bred. So they found the guppies that are nice and colorful. They choose those. They breed them with other guppies that are nice and colorful to get the desired traits. Okay? Okay, so dog breeders, again, this is what I was talking about before, about how dogs come from wolves. And they are, once they get a variation that they like, they keep breeding that variation, and we get other different dogs that do different things. Okay? This is something that I actually didn't even know until I started investigating and researching this myself. But wild mustard plant, all of these other vegetables come from the wild mustard plant. So cauliflower, broccoli, cabbage, kale, those are probably things that you're familiar with. They all started as variations of wild mustard, and then people selectively, once they got the traits that they wanted, they kept breeding them over and over again. So broccoli, we don't even think about that. We think it's its own vegetable. We think it's very separate from cabbage, but they all did come from wild mustard at some point. Okay? Selective breeding. Other examples. Human nature provides variations. Humans select variations of the genes that are useful to us. For example, a farmer breeds only his best livestock. Okay, he's going to take his best bull and breed it with his best cow, and then get the best, hopefully the best results in a calf. Okay? In essence, when humans selectively breed organisms for certain traits, they're selecting for certain genes. Okay? The gene of having freckles or not having freckles, the gene for blue eyes, the gene for, I don't know, anything. Your color of hair, or your color of eyes, or the size of your nose, or how tall you might be. Okay? The last thing we're going to talk about is genetics versus environment. So, Objective 55, I can describe how environmental factors can have an impact on a person's genetic makeup. The effect of the environment are often influenced by the environment or an organism's surroundings. So just because it's in your genetics doesn't mean that it's 100% true. Things can change. Many of a person's characteristics are determined by interaction between genes and the environment. For example, your athletic ability. You may have some natural talent to be athletic, but a lot of it comes from hard work and dedication. Your height can be affected by your diet. Smoking, damaging a growth plate, if you ingest a large amount of caffeine at a young age, that can stunt your growth. Cancer. Exposing your body to UV rays from the sun can change your genetics. You can get cancer if you do that. Again, with the singing ability, same as athletics. You may have been born with some natural ability, but you can increase your singing ability with singing lessons. Other examples, your diet plays a huge role in determining many factors that have effect on our genetics. For example, your genetics might say that you're skinny, but if you continue to eat and eat and eat, you may become obese. You may have high cholesterol. You may develop heart disease. Other environmental factors such as alcohol and drug use can also affect your genetics in many, many ways. Okay, so there's a lot of environmental factors that can affect your genetics as well. And that is it. Make sure that if you have questions that you bring them into class. I can only help you when you tell me that you need help. All right, see you guys in class.